by reimposing aluminum tariffs on Canada. Canada was taking advantage of us, as usual. And I signed it, and it imposes, because the aluminum business was being decimated by Canada, very unfair to our jobs and our great aluminum workers.
Hundreds of everyday household items are about to get a lot more expensive thanks to President Trump's trade war and specifically the steel and aluminum tariffs.
And the list continues to go on. It's going to hurt the steel workers. It's going to hurt the aluminum workers down there. It's really, really unfortunate. He's went down that avenue with his closest friend and ally.
The world expected tariffs to protect American industry, but instead, they sent shockwaves through the entire aluminum market. Within months, Washington's decision to impose first a 25% tariff, then double it to 50%, triggered a price spiral that rattled manufacturers across the globe. In the U.S. Midwest, the aluminum premium surged by an extraordinary 82%, forcing auto plants, aerospace lines, and even defense contractors to scale back or halt production altogether. But while America was stumbling under the weight of its own policy, Canada was rewriting the rules. Quebec's aluminum producers, long overshadowed by their southern neighbor, seized the disruption to reposition themselves not as secondary suppliers, but as anchors of stability. By redirecting flows toward Europe and Asia, Canada transformed what looked like a crisis into leverage, and in the process carved out a reputation for resilience. Could this sudden realignment mark the beginning of a global shift in how nations secure their most critical materials? Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button. A simple like helps push this video to more people who need to see it. If the first shock revealed America's weakness, the second wave showed just how quickly Canada could pivot. Instead of clinging to the old dependence on the U.S. market, Quebec moved decisively towards safer and larger partners overseas. By the second quarter of 2025, Canada's aluminum exports to the United States had slipped from 95% of total volume to just 78%. At the very same time, Europe surged from a marginal 0.2% share to a commanding 18%, rewriting decades of trade patterns almost overnight. The transformation was even more striking at the company level. Aluminerie Alouette, once modestly engaged in Europe with just 4% of its output, ramped that figure up to an extraordinary 57%, locking in a future where Europe, not America, could become its main stage. Industry leaders underscored the shift. Jean Simard of the Aluminum Association of Canada called it a strategic turning point, not a forced reaction. And when Ottawa answered Washington's tariffs with its own 25% duties on $21 billion worth of American goods, it sent a clear message. Canada was no longer playing defense. Still with us? Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's next. Building on that trade realignment, Quebec unveiled a far more powerful advantage, one that goes beyond markets and into the realm of climate credibility. Canada is not just exporting aluminum, it is exporting a climate solution. Unlike conventional smelters that flood the atmosphere with emissions, Quebec's hydro-powered facilities release just 2.2 tons of CO2 per ton of aluminum produced, barely 1/7 of the global average. That environmental edge translates directly into value. Buyers are increasingly willing to pay a premium of $150 to $200 per ton for low-carbon metal, effectively turning sustainability into a revenue stream. And with the European Union's carbon border adjustment mechanism set to penalize dirty aluminum with tariffs exceeding $300 per ton from 2026 onward, Canada's producers are positioned to glide past those barriers almost untouched. This is no longer simply a cost advantage. It is becoming the new industrial standard. In a world racing toward net zero targets, Canada holds something few others can claim, a green brand that is not just desirable, but indispensable. That green advantage did not remain theoretical. It translated directly into contracts that reshaped the balance of trade. While American producers were losing ground, Canada was locking in long-term agreements designed to secure strategic markets for years to come. In the first half of 2025 alone, aluminum exports to the European Union climbed 12% compared to the same period in 2024, signaling that Canada's pivot was not a temporary detour, but a durable shift. New clients quickly emerged across the continent. Germany, the Netherlands, Poland, and Denmark became fresh buyers, eager to guarantee access to carbon-friendly metal that would keep their industries compliant with incoming climate rules. At the corporate level, the deals were even more telling. Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes all signed agreements to integrate Quebec's aluminum into their production lines, shielding themselves from the looming CBM penalties. Asia soon followed Europe's lead. Japan and South Korea secured their own long-term contracts, ensuring that they, too, could tap into Canada's low-emission supply chain. The combined value of these new commitments has been estimated in the tens of billions of dollars, an extraordinary figure for a single year, and a clear sign that Canada is no longer just competing but defining the terms of the global aluminum trade. The wave of new contracts did more than boost Canada's balance sheets. It shifted the industrial power map of North America. For decades, Canada had been seen as the junior partner, supplying raw materials while the United States dictated the rules. By mid-2025, that relationship was no longer so clear. Canada's export share to the U.S., once as high as 85% in 2010, had slipped below 70%, while trade worth nearly $18 billion was redirected toward Europe's climate-conscious markets. At the same time, the United States was finding itself increasingly dependent on imports it could not control. Since 2015, America's smelting capacity has eroded by about 15%, leaving fewer domestic options even as tariffs raised costs. The contrast could not be starker. U.S. policy was narrowing its industrial base, while Quebec was consolidating its role as the undisputed hub for green aluminum in North America. For the first time, the regional balance of industrial power was tilting northward. What began as a defensive response to tariffs was fast becoming an offensive strategy, positioning Canada as the one shaping supply chains while the U.S. scrambled to keep pace. This industrial realignment was never left entirely to market forces. Ottawa moved swiftly to demonstrate that Canada's aluminum sector would not be left vulnerable to foreign tariffs or external shocks. Policymakers opened discussions on a comprehensive framework of support for key producers, such as Rio Tinto, Alcoa Canada, and Aluminerie Alouette. The package extended beyond immediate relief, offering liquidity guarantees to stabilize operations, dedicated financing channels for export expansion, and targeted reductions in energy costs to safeguard competitiveness against lower-standard producers abroad. What made these measures stand out was not only their scale but their careful design. Rather than inviting accusations of unfair trade practices, they were structured to comply with World Trade Organization rules, ensuring Canada's position could not be challenged on procedural grounds. This allowed Ottawa to send a double signal: to domestic firms, reassurance that they would not stand alone, and to international markets, confirmation that Canada was acting within a legitimate, rules-based framework. In practical terms, this amounted to a shift in philosophy. Aluminum was no longer being treated as just another commodity to be traded on price. It was reframed as a strategic sector essential to national resilience. The language from Ottawa increasingly emphasized security of supply, industrial sovereignty, and climate alignment, placing aluminum in the same category of importance as critical minerals or clean energy infrastructure. Rather than a short-lived reaction to Washington's tariffs, these policies laid the groundwork for something more enduring. They marked the beginning of a national industrial strategy that aimed not simply to defend market share, but to expand it on Canada's own terms. In doing so, Ottawa positioned the country not as a passive participant in global trade, but as an active architect of the rules and standards that would define the next industrial era. The tariffs from Washington may have sparked the immediate shift, but they were only the spark. What Canada is constructing goes far beyond a trade dispute. It resembles the framework of a new industrial order fit for the 21st century. As global climate policy gains momentum, instruments like the European Union's carbon border adjustment are no longer viewed as obstacles, but as platforms that reward nations capable of delivering clean production at scale. Few countries are as well positioned as Canada, which can combine abundant hydropower with modern refining capacity to offer a low-carbon product from the ground up. Projections suggest Europe's appetite for low-carbon aluminum will expand by 15 to 20% by 2030, yet the real story lies in how quickly Canada is moving to lock in that demand. Ottawa is fostering long-term partnerships that integrate every stage of the supply chain, from mining operations in Quebec and Labrador to smelters powered by renewable energy to end users in transportation and consumer goods. This is more than exporting metal. It is building a full ecosystem that shields producers and buyers alike from the volatility of global markets. By committing early, Companies gain predictability, while Canada cements its role as the default supplier of choice. The ripple effects are set to extend into every corner of modern life. Beverage companies searching for sustainable packaging, automakers racing to decarbonize their fleets, and aerospace firms under pressure to meet net zero targets will increasingly find Canadian aluminum woven into their operations. Over time, the Canadian standard could emerge as the benchmark against which others are measured, not because it is cheaper, but because it embodies the environmental credibility that markets, regulators, and investors now demand. In this way, a resource once seen as simply abundant becomes the anchor of a new global order, where climate responsibility is indistinguishable from industrial leadership. For Canada, the challenge is no longer proving its ability to compete. It is deciding how far it wants to push this advantage into the broader architecture of the global economy. The aluminum battle is no longer about prices. It has become proof that Canada can lead the next era of green industry. While the United States has surrendered market share, jobs, and even critical technologies through its own policy missteps, Canada has managed not only to hold its ground, but to redefine its role in the global supply chain. Today, Europe, Japan, and South Korea see Canada as a strategic partner they cannot replace, precisely because its resources align with the climate commitments shaping the future economy. The question that now hangs in the air is not whether Canada can supply aluminum, but whether it dares to expand this model into batteries, electric vehicles, and even artificial intelligence. If Ottawa chooses that path, this could mark the turning point that elevates Canada into a true green industrial power of the 21st century. And that brings us back to a bigger question. Are we watching a temporary trade shuffle or the emergence of a permanent new order where Canada sets the standard and America struggles to adapt? The answer may depend on how boldly Canada acts from here. If this video gave you something to think about, like and subscribe to support more content like this. Thank you.